Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. It's a privilege to be able to be here. And it's lovely that when we have a great crowd. And I hope that in the next few minutes I could share something that will inspire us, because it looks like many of us need a oomph this week. We're getting a lot of messages from people. People are feeling down. No judgment. It's tough. Even if you're not struggling financially, it's just tough. This strange world that seems to be becoming more and more unfamiliar to us day by day. And if I told you 4 months ago that this is going to last 4 months without clarity, I don't think most of us would have been able to accept that. But here we are, still standing. And it's important that we acknowledge that. As cheesy as it sounds, it's important to acknowledge that we're more resilient than we give ourselves credit. And tonight I reached out to the community and asked what topic they want me to talk about. And pretty much everybody that I got the response besides one said, let's talk about resilience. And my headspace today has been on the whole concept of resilience, obviously preparing a speech for tonight. And tonight I'm going to address it from various different factors and take it through the story of the destruction of the temple, which we find ourselves in now. Now I just want to focus on one element. That's really what I want to focus on, one element, and take it maybe into more depth than I would take it tonight. And the thing I want to address now is really the ability of being flexible versus rigid. Men are usually considered rigid, right? It says in the Talmud, an old woman in the house is a blessing, an old man in the house is a curse. Or like a parasite, a better translation. Take which one you like. But basically, it's not a, why? Because the older the man gets, the more rigid he becomes. Just natural, the way the man's biology and just way of being is that we become more and more stuck in our ways, and women, as they get older, usually they become more and more flexible. And I have to say, I agree, having, sat with a lot of older gentlemen, a lot of older women, it's much more pleasant to sit with older women. You don't feel like you're sitting with old people. You sit with old men, you feel like you're sitting with old people. It's very, forgiveness. Please don't tell your husbands or your fathers. Why? Because we become more rigid. That's what really it is, rigid. So let's unpack together what the rigid means and what's the opposite of rigid, and that's flexible. Rigid is that we make sense of the world in a certain way, and then that's the way we engage with the world without any ability of change, navigating differently. We just have our way of dealing with stuff, and that's the way it is, and there is no gray, other roads. Maybe think about it a different way. Can't you see a different way of dealing with it? No, that's the way it is. And often rigidity is married to its good partner, and that is self-righteousness. Self-righteousness is when rigidity comes together with, religion, and suddenly you're blaming it. What do you mean? I'm doing the right thing and everybody else is wrong. And often people will tell me that they had negative experiences from people, with religious people. The person was very self-righteous, condescending, patronizing, disrespectful. And ultimately, I always say it rarely has to do with Judaism, and it has to do with the personality. And Judaism is just being used by the personality, because Judaism doesn't change your personality unless you allow it to. Any way of life doesn't change you unless you allow it to. You could put on the full garb and dress like an absolute frummie and inside be a total gangster. Yiddishkeit is not what changes you. What changes you is the decision to allow the messages underlying it to change you. But becoming religious doesn't make a person great. Religious people aren't necessarily any more moral than somebody else. Sometimes the rituals of the religion force us to be a little moral, but ultimately it doesn't necessarily make us and change us. What changes us is our character. So you could have a very rigid character or a very black and white character who's attracted to religion because religion is a safety net for people who are black and white. and I don't only mean in color, I mean in the way of thinking, right, wrong. Some people feel very safe in that world. I can be honest, there are times I do. I don't consider myself a rigid character, but there's many times that I feel safe in that world of right, wrong, and versus the ability of being nuanced, maybe, maybe not. Religion offers these kind of characters a tremendous peace and safety net. But life doesn't allow us to be rigid. And the truth is, religion isn't an excuse to be rigid. Religion, believe me, I've grown up religious communities and they're as diverse as any other community, even though technically everybody's doing the same mitzvot and, you know, wearing beards and having the same size hats and wearing the same colors. Believe me, I don't consider any of my friends who dress exactly like me to be remotely similar to me in personality, because fundamentally we're diverse. So if you're rigid, it's because not, as I said again, it's not because of religion, it's because we see the world through rigid eyes, stiff. There's just one way of dealing with it. And you're like sometimes trying to impress on this individual, if it's not you, if you're trying to impress on your husband or whatever, you're trying to impress on them the power of being flexible. Like there's another way of thinking. There's another way of raising your kid. There's another way of dealing with your parent. There's another way of there's a million ways to deal with everything. But some people feel that that is scary and threatens their way of life. And therefore they become very tense and they're only comfortable living in a rigid world. And what's fascinating, having taught in a high school in the past, I've found that you already see rigid characters at a young age. I'm not talking about 5-year-olds maybe as well, but my experiences in high school. And you see kids who are 15, 16, who already have a set way of making sense of this world. They have their version of reality. And that's the only way they navigate the world. They navigate the world through their version of reality, which for me is devastating, I'll be honest. Like that a kid at that age already thinks that they are justified in making sense of the world in their way, for me sounds ridiculous. Why? Why would you? Why do you think that you have to have the whole world through your version at that stage? Why? Don't you want to see the world in more ways than one? Don't you want, as a high school student, to be able to hear that there's different perspectives than the way you accept it? Why would you want to navigate this world in a rigid form? And that's really my question for us today. And that is, are we rigid in any areas of our lives? Because if we are, then it's very hard to be resilient. It's very hard to cope. If we still think that the world has to run a certain way 4 months after being in lockdown, then we have a problem. Now, should be fine, theory. But if I'm getting uncomfortable with the world because it's not meeting my expectations and I'm not adapting to this new world, I have to ask myself, am I flexible or am I rigid? There's an interesting medrash that's a commentary on the 5 books of Moshe. If you remember the story of Passover, I know we're not remotely near Passover, and please don't panic. Passover is not on the horizon. It's in 8 months, 9 months. And the story goes that one of the 10 plagues was hail. And it talks about the hail that knocked out a lot of the grains. But the next plague after the hail was locusts. And the commentaries ask the question, if the hail knocked out all the grain, all the grass, all the greenery, all the vegetation, what was left to be eaten by the locusts? And they share an interesting insight, which technically is all about, nature, but it's a lesson about life. They say that the hail could only break the rigid things coming out of the ground, like trees and stalks that are stiff. But when it came to grass or other kind of vegetation, other kinds of bushes that go and are flexible, those are the ones that stood, because the hail just knocks it down and it bounces back up. But if you're rigid, then the hail knocks you and then you never make it up again. Because think of it, you're a tree and you get bang, 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 you knock over. But if you're a tree that could just, bounce back, so it knocks you down, you bounce back. It doesn't use that much pressure to knock you down, and you come right back. And what they say is that ultimately it was the unrigid greenery that survived the plague, and obviously it wasn't taken out in the next plague. But there's a lesson, and that is you can't be taken down when you're flexible. You can only be taken down when you're rigid. A storm cannot knock down a flexible thing. A house is not flexible, so therefore it can be taken out by a storm. A boat is flexible, so the storm comes and the boat just goes with the storm. Noah survives in the ark. Flexibility is the only way to really allow the world to take you in the journey, because ultimately life is here, and we spoke about it previously, life is here to teach us lessons. Life is a classroom. We are here in this world to learn lessons. And by definition, in order to learn lessons, each day we're in a different classroom. Because the lessons of yesterday, unless we didn't learn them and we have to learn them again, chances are today is going to be a new classroom with new lessons. But in order for me to adapt to new lessons each day, new world, I have to be adaptable. That's really what flexibility is, the ability to adapt. To let go of my fantasy of what the world is supposed to look like and accept the world the way it is. At the same time, trying to make it better. I'm not saying to be pacifists and just say, okay, this is the way it is, and be like an absolute lost boat. A boat goes with the wind, but you also have to navigate it. You also have to know somewhere where you're going. I'm not saying we have to become passive, but I'm finding that the people who are able to cope with this more are not necessarily those who have more money. As I've said before, during this COVID crisis, the amount of money you have, obviously, if you don't have anything, then you're struggling. But if you're middle class or upper class and you have enough food on the table, there's very little difference between your two lives. Both of you are not flying anywhere, both of you are not going anywhere, both of you are not going to fancy cruises. The wealthy one's not going to fancy cruise, both of you are not driving your cars. Doesn't make a difference if it's a Honda in the garage or it's a Aston Martin. It's all the same thing. It's in the garage. But the people who are coping with it better are the ones who have taken into their life flexibility, who are allowing themselves to see the world in nuanced ways. And so they're saying, okay, this is not the world the way I want it. This is not ideal. Not that before it was ideal, but it was more, at least based on what I was used to, it was more ideal. But now I'm adapting to the new ideal. And I'm ready for the new world that's going to come post-COVID, which is not going to be recognizable to the pre-COVID. It's not going to be the same. No question about it. Travel is never going to be the same. Business travel is going to become close to obsolete. It's going to be very hard to justify why you have to fly to Timbuktu for a business meeting if you could just do it on Zoom. In general, travel is going to become more cautious. Small things like engaging with people, handshakes, cleanliness, all those kind of things are going to change. Working from home versus working from work, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to become a different world. Some of it great, some of it maybe not so great. But I have to be like a boat. I can't be like a house. I have to be able to go, okay, new ocean, new reality. A house will only survive if it's exactly, a house is the perfect example. What I'm sitting with you right now, it's absolutely rigid. Comes the tiniest earthquake and things start falling. A boat obviously has a massive storm, things fall apart, but it's made to navigate the average storm. That's what a boat does. That's what a ship does. You navigate the storm. Okay, fine, it's moving. Okay, so I move with it. Over here, the smallest little thing, my house moves an inch and already like there's a certain part of my brickwork that's moved a drop, etc. And then, a few bricks start falling into each other. That's just the way it is. A house is made to be rigid. It only survives in a rigid environment. You take a storm, and one of those good high-felt storms here in Johannesburg, and you get a little hail and you start getting smashed windows. Again, because the house works as long as the climate and the atmosphere is average. Exceptional circumstances knock it out. We can't be like that in life. We can't be that stiff. We have to have the ability, or and develop that ability of saying, okay, what now? Where now? This is not the life I imagined, but since when does life work out the way I imagine? You see, we have a very funny version of what life is supposed to look like, and I want to delve into this for a few minutes. We bought into the narrative that goes like this. Person comes into this world for, let's say, 80 years. If they're lucky, they make it past. If they're unlucky, they don't make it that far. Fine. The average age right now in the West is 78, so 80 years. You make it to 80. And your goal is during this life to give yourself the best opportunities possible, to be as successful as possible, to have as much pleasure as possible, to have as little aggravation as possible, to be as popular as possible, and to die with a good name. I'm not talking about a bad life. That's a pretty good life, right? It's decent. It's a decent, respectable way of living. But ultimately, what's the point of that? Am I here to make a name for myself? Or am I here to play a role? What do I mean? I mean, the way I see myself, and on my good moments, obviously when I have weak moments, I lose my clarity. But a strong moment is when I'm living with clarity. A weak moment is when I don't have clarity. In my strong moments, when I have that clarity, I know that whether I make a success or not, I have one goal in mind, and that is to play the part that God wants me to play, under whatever circumstances he puts me. I'm not designing my life. Yes, I believe in power of good thinking. I believe in strategy. I believe in making smart decisions, but ultimately the end goal is in God's hands. And I'm comfortable with that. And it's not about me designing my life. I could have all the fantasies of how my life is supposed to look, but it's his call. And one of the things that COVID has been doing to us is reminding us our mortality. Like suddenly we're all conscious about health, even those of us who maybe don't struggle with health issues on a day-to-day. You know, some people unfortunately struggle with the health issues from a young age. Some people till their late, their older years, they don't really struggle with real health issues. And they don't face their mortality. They're living 40, 50, 60, and they don't really think of death as anything on the horizon. And suddenly comes this thing, and even though like it has very low death statistics under a certain age, still it makes people focus on mortality. There's no question a lot more people are writing their wills, are getting their things in order at this stage, which is not a bad thing, by the way, regardless. Even according to Torah, we're supposed to take care of these things. But focusing on mortality reminds me that ultimately, I don't know how long I have here. I don't have a clue. I hope God has in mind for me that I have a long life. I hope I get to see my kids married, my grandchildren married. I hope I get to see the coming of Mashiach. I hope. But I don't have a clue. I'm going to do the best I can to make it there, try to do some exercise, eat healthy, sleep enough, live a relatively balanced lifestyle, of course. But the end result, I have no idea. No idea. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm not saying I've always been comfortable with that. Maybe since my dad's death. I've become comfortable with that. Okay, that's what it is. I don't know what you have in mind, God, but I'm willing to go with your plan wherever it takes me. I'm willing to go with life wherever it takes me. Yes, I pray that it's a relatively pleasant journey going forward and it doesn't have terrible waves and I don't have to face serious inner and outer demons. I pray for that. But at the same time, I'm ready for whatever comes. I hope. I pray. The first words that Abraham really called out when God tells him, sacrifice your son, and the first act of sacrifice, God calls on Avram and he says, Avram, Avram, and Avram says, Hineni, here I am. I've shown up. I'm with you. I'm not saying we negate emotions. I'm not saying that we don't struggle. But our goal is to adapt. Our goal is not to be rigid. And 4 months into this, we have to ask ourselves, have we adapted as much as we could? Or could we do a better job? Have we allowed our family to adapt? Have we adapted our new lifestyle, or are we constantly pining for the world that was without any embracing of the world that is? For whatever reason, this is happening. And I've told you many times, I don't claim to know God's reasons. Many rabbis do, I don't. Obviously, they have a better connection than I do. God doesn't tell me anything. I don't know why this is happening, but there's no question it's happening by design, for me at least. As a believer, everything happens by design. So I'm doing my best, sometimes successful, sometimes not, to go with it. Okay, where now? What now? Instead of constantly grieving, like today, you go on Facebook and everyone's like, lots of jokes and pity for the alcohol ban. Shame. Oh, shame. Really tough life. All I'm worried about is where I'm going to get wine for Kiddush, but I'll make a plan. And like you just see anger every single time. Oh, this government doesn't know what it's doing. Fine. Could be. But if every single change to your life makes you vent and angry, for me, that's a problem. Yes, there's big tragedies in life, and we're shaken. Every person with a heart is shaken. But if every little inconvenience knocks us off our feet, we have a problem, because we just won't cope. And life is about coping. Life's about getting up time and time again. That's the definition of resilience. Getting up and fighting nonstop, over and over and over, with an absolute conviction that I can and I will get through this. And ultimately, very often the difference between I can and I can't is what you believe about yourself. And I know I'm quoting an anti-Semite, Henry Ford, but he said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. You can or you cannot, you're right. That's true. The moment every single thing becomes a sob story, and everything is like, oh gosh, I'm just not coping, I'm not coping, I'm not coping. Get that narrative out of our heads. We'll be fine. We're much stronger. We have genes within us that go back thousands of years of people who've struggled through real hardship, and they've come out, and we have their DNA in us, and we can. Within our DNA, we have the ability to be resilient. The fact that maybe we haven't activated it, the fact that we don't practice it every single day, fine. So we have to get better at that, but we are resilient. We need to acknowledge that. And the best way, I believe, to acknowledge that and to go forward is the ability to become flexible, to start seeing ourselves like a boat on the ocean rather than a house on ground. And each hour to call out to God and say, what do you want from me now? What's the call of the hour? What is my calling now? And that's it. And then I've played my part. Because the longer term this issue is, like each month, the narrative changes. The first month, it was an anomaly. Second month had its own emotions. Third month has it. Now in the fourth month, it has its own different set of emotions, as it's becoming clearer and clearer that the rest of the year is going to look something like this. And the 2020 is going to be pretty much this in some shape or another. A year of our life has been taken over. A year, a full year. Unless a miracle happens, at least a year, if not longer, of our life is unrecognizable. So what do I do with that? Do I go around with all those memes that say 2020, waste of a year? I spent a year cleaning my hands, all those, one-liners. Or do I say, I spent this year and allowed the year to take me where I needed to go? Because I believe that everything in this world happens with design. And not only big design for everybody else, but big design for me. God wanted me to go through this. Why? I have no idea. And he wanted you to go through it. for your reasons. I think I know my reasons. I actually do have an idea. I do know which character traits have been activated and which ones had not been developed before this year. But God wanted me to come and learn a whole new skill set and become a better person through different circumstances. But the only way I'll allow this new circumstance, this new reality to change me is if I'm flexible. If I don't stand there stiff like this, if I'm not, the whole time waiting to be attacked, who's the next one giving me a punch? Some of us walk through life like we're in a boxing ring, just waiting for the next person to punch us. But the truth is, you can't go like this. You can't live life like this. You live life like that. Okay, what now? What now? Where am I going? Okay, turn right, turn left. Which direction? What's the call of the hour? Where now? The biggest difference between rigidity and flexibility, I'll give you, is the difference between life in jail and life in freedom. Jail life is the ultimate life of rigidity. And certain characters love it and thrive over there. Everything is dictated to you. When you talk, when you eat, when you sleep, when you read, when you exercise, when you breathe, everything is dictated. Freedom, on the other hand, is nothing's dictated other than what you dictate to yourself. That's the definition of freedom. Freedom is you have the ability, you are free to either destroy your life or not. It's easier to destroy your life out of prison than in prison. It's not as easy to get drugs in prison. It's not as easy to get alcohol in prison. It's not as easy to do some stupid, immoral mistake in prison. It's much easier out of prison. I'm saying an efficient prison is that, by definition, controls your life. And you could adapt to this rigid existence and life becomes predictable. But freedom, by definition, freedom is that every day I don't know what walls I'm going to wake up in. I'm not going to sit in the same cell for 25 years. Life is going to change. Circumstances are going to change. I might make a decision to move. I might make a decision to this. And as life takes me, I'll go with it. I'll flow with it. I'll take it. In prison, you don't have to do that. All you have to do is just accept, okay, somebody else is controlling my day. This is the wall of my room for the next 27 years, mazel tov. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's a life of rigidity. Flexibility is freedom. But you could be rigid in a free world, but it's not going to work. You could be rigid in prison and it will work. Fine, nothing's going to happen to you. But if you're rigid in this world, as the world is moving, we're just going to get knocked off and we'll be standing outside saying, one second, what happened to my world? I don't know how to use Zoom. And you're like, yeah, time to get flexible, time to figure out how to use Zoom. The world is like, it's amazing to see how many people were forced to adapt to technology in the last 4 months quicker than they had to adapt in the last 20 years. All these people who've been saying, I'm not tech savvy, I'm clueless, I've never been on Zoom, I've never really, learned how to use technology. At some stage, technology came into the saying, I'm not asking you to be a genius, but if you don't figure out how to sit on a Zoom call, we have a problem because you're not going to be able to engage with anyone and anything. And then suddenly, well, mazel tov, everyone knows how to use WhatsApp and everyone's figuring out Zoom. They might not know how to run the coolest Zoom program, but they could get on because we can't afford to be stiff. We have to be open to learn new things. Otherwise, we just get frozen in time. There's an interesting Talmudic story about a character by the name of Choni Ama'agel. Choni, the guy who made a circle, one time he drew a circle in the ground and he stood in it and begged for prayers, etc. But that's not the story I want to focus on. The story goes, accept it or not, but it's a good thought to think about. Story goes, he fell asleep for 70 years. He went into a coma. You've heard people go into coma for 5 years, 2 years, he went into coma for 70 years. He wakes up. And he doesn't recognize his world. I know we think that in the ancient world, things never change, but he walks out. The city he knows is gone. Everyone he knew that was alive is gone. The only people that are alive now that he maybe met, they were 8 then and 78 now. So pretty much nobody recognizes him. Nobody knows, he can't make sense of anything. So the story goes, he asks to die. He says, God, I can't adapt to this world. Crazy? I mean, like, I was already an old man, but when I went to sleep, now I wake up 70 years later, I walk into, like, take me. I can't. And many of us feel that way. We're like, the world is moving and I just can't adapt. But we have to. Every day that we're alive is calling on us to adapt and to make this world the way I am to the maximum, to live it to the maximum. And each and every one of us has the opportunity to do so. So my question that I want to finish off and like leave you thinking is, how flexible am I? Am I allowing myself to adapt to this world, or am I rigid? And if it's your husband that's the problem, send him to me. Yeah, because I'm sure he's going to call me and sit there saying, yeah, Rabbi, I heard that my wife came home and told me that the rabbi's willing to talk to you about rigidity. That's going to work. But it's important for us to always remember that rigidity is not a skill. It's not an attribute that's great. It has its spaces, it has its times. But in a time like this, and if you have a child that's a rigid character, it's important now to help them, to talk to them about the idea of being flexible, how important it is to be flexible, how important it is to go with the flow. At the same time, not be a total loser and just allow the flow to take you, but to go with it, to not fight it the whole time, and go where you need to go within this world. I pray that we go into a better world quickly, but as long as we're in this world, and I have no idea how long it's going to take, embrace it. Miracles are still happening. Beauty is still all around us. The world is still a magnificent place. But it's only the flexible who are able to see it. L'chaim.